This new model called DeepSeek R1 has absolutely taken the tech industry by storm in a way that has actually led to some huge drops in the stock market. Nvidia alone suffered a $600 billion stock drop in their valuation. And yet most people are seeing this as a good thing. They're seeing this as a major innovation in the world of AI. So let's dive in and see what it's all about. And also, since this is a channel all about using AI for creative writing, we want to answer the question, is it actually good at writing? So let's dive in. So the reason that DeepSeek R1 has really been a big deal recently is not so much that it does anything particularly amazingly well. What it is unique about it is that it is equal in capabilities to some of the top models out there like O1, GPT-4o, the latest version, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, etc., while also having been trained at a fraction of the cost, just a couple $1 million really, which is significantly cheaper than the cost of training these big models for these companies like OpenAI and Anthropic. Now, there are some people out there disputing the idea that this was actually trained on the cost that they say that it was trained on. I tend to lean towards Occam's razor, which would suggest that what people are saying is probably the truth, or at least close to it. And it's also important to remember that the people that are saying that this is a hoax are the people that have strong financial ties, investments in these big companies like OpenAI, which are potentially suffering from the emergence of a model like DeepSeek. But the fact is, DeepSeek is a lot cheaper for you and I to run. It is open source, which means you can download it onto your own computer. You can run it if you have a computer that can handle it, which a lot of computers can. And it's a generally cheap model. It's right up there in the affordable area of things like O1 Mini and stuff like that. So it's definitely something we want to take a look at, but is it actually good, right? If we want to use this model in our writing, like, is it actually worth it? Is it actually going to change things up from the way we've been doing things with the current models? So let's take a look at all of the tests that I ran, and you can see how it measures up to these models. We know from other benchmark tests out there that it does really well in areas of math and reasoning and the like. I have my own qualitative assessment that looks at it from a creative writing standpoint. And as far as I know, this is the only qualitative assessment that is out there. It's not perfect by any means. Of course, when it comes to creative writing, there's always some level of subjectivity, but there's also such a thing as good writing and bad writing, right? And I like to think being a well-read reader, is that a thing? Okay, I think it's the same thing. But being someone who reads a lot, who studies writing for a living, I like to think I have a decent idea of what is good writing, what isn't. And so I've created this qualitative assessment to actually go through it and see how well it does. So this right here is a breakdown of some of the data that I get here for this qualitative assessment. And I've pulled up my favorite models. So I've got Claude 3.5 Sonnet, GPT-4o, specifically the version that was updated for creative writing and readability. We also have O1 and of course DeepSeek R1, this new model that has been taking the world by storm. In this assessment, I have the category that they're in. So these are all categorized as favorites, but I also have the company that developed them, like Anthropic, OpenAI, DeepSeek, etc. I give it an overall score. And as you can tell, it doesn't have as high of an overall score as the others here, but I want to put a cork into that right now because there are actually some areas where it does really, really well. And given the price of DeepSeek, I think it's well worth looking at anyway, even if it's not quite at the level of some of these other top dogs in the AI space. So first of all, let's look at this blue section here, which is all about brainstorming. I test it for brainstorming different log lines, so different story ideas. And then I take a specific idea and I ask it to flesh out an entire outline using my 40 chapter plot module template. I also am interested in seeing, like, did it actually complete an entire outline in one sitting, or did it have to break it up into chunks? That's measured here. And then I ask it to take a specific chapter and break it down into a more detailed story beat thing. And I want to look at the story beats and say, do these make logical sense, etc. And does it show an aptitude for creating a good scene? So these are the brainstorming prompts, and you can see all of the answers to these prompts. Well, first of all, I have the prompts here. So here's the logline prompt, here's the outlining prompt, which is really long because I've got the entire plot module thing in there. We've got the beats test prompt, and I'll get into the rest later. And I've specifically designed these prompts to be simple. Now, simple doesn't necessarily mean short. I've got the plot module template, which is extremely long, but I'm also not trying to do crazy amounts of prompt engineering with it. Because first of all, prompt engineering is something that is often unique to the model you're working with. So sometimes you have to adjust a prompt for one model and then adjust it differently for another model. And I also think that eventually we're going to get to a point where you don't necessarily need to have lots of prompt engineering to get the results you want. All you're going to need is clear communication about your story, about the templates you're using, that sort of thing. As long as you're clearly communicating something, it will be able to give you quality results regardless. And so that's why most of my prompts are pretty simple. It just says things like using the following concept and outline template, generate a fully fleshed out outline for the book. And then I do give it just a little bit more instruction here just to be clear, but ultimately it's a very simple thing. I'll show you an example. My ad headline prompt is give me 20 Facebook ad headlines to sell an epic fantasy book about the following concept. The headline should hook potential fantasy readers by giving them a mystery or an information gap they want filled. And then I give them the concept of the story. Now, when it comes to ad copy and things like headlines, there are a lot of frameworks that you can find online that will help. And I could add all of those frameworks in here and say, use these frameworks in your ad copy. But I'm really more interested in finding out, does it write good ads even without my prompting it with all of the templates and everything? I just want to see like how well does it do by default? That's really what I'm trying to measure here, and that's why my prompts are intentionally simple. Let's look at the results. Of the logline prompts, I ask it for 20 log lines, and then I highlight in green, as you can see here, the ones that I think are decent. Not necessarily perfect, but the ones that I think there's a nugget of a good story in there that could be fleshed out and expanded upon. And you can see I got a couple in here. Some of these are pretty decent. And my overall assessment is that it got 7 out of 20, which is only surpassed by Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which got 10 out of 20. So I thought that was pretty good. Now, when it came to the outline, one of the things it did well is it did do the entire outline in one go. Although I noticed that by the end of the outline, it was very sparse with the details. It gave me like one sentence per chapter. So it did kind of break down towards the end and not give me as good of a summary for each chapter, but it did do the whole thing in one go, which is a plus. Now, I have yet to see any of these models do a good job of giving me an entire 40 chapter outline in one prompt. Usually I get better results by going one chapter at a time, writing down what I think is a good summary for that chapter, then giving it the next chapter and saying, okay, what should happen in this chapter, ask for multiple ideas, and then kind of pick and choose bits and pieces from those ideas, write the next chapter outline summary myself, and then continue on in that fashion. But I do think we're going to get to a point where these AI models will be able to give a cohesive story that makes sense and is a good story in one prompt using an outline template like I've got here. So what I do is I go through the outline template that it gives me, and you can see the one for DeepSeek right here. We have like the prologue, opening image, a gaunt figure in tattered royal garb, chained in a shadowy cavern, whispers a curse as shadowy tendrils sap his strength. His eyes flash with betrayal as he vows vengeance against his brother King Theros. A swarm of Sucran drones drag him into darkness. This is the exiled brother, the future Hunger King. And I thought, yeah, this is a good foreshadow of events to come. I went ahead and highlighted that in green. And as you can see, I went through and highlighted the chapters that I thought were decent. You can see most of them are still not highlighted, although I was pleasantly surprised by the ending. I thought it had a couple of good chapters here at the end. But as you can see, like this is one chapter right here. It's only giving me a sentence or two here at the end. So that might actually be one of the reasons why they're okay, is because it's not giving me too many details. It's just giving me a brief overview, but I thought the subject was decent. So overall, it gave me 15 chapters that I thought were usable out of 41, and 2 of the others have done better for me. O1 gave me 29 chapters that I thought were decent, and Claude 3.5 Sonnet gave me 33 chapters, which so far is the best that I've gotten out of a model. Although Claude 3.5 Sonnet, I did have to prompt it multiple times to finish the overall chapter, because it only gave me 5 chapters in the first prompt, whereas O1 and DeepSeek gave me the entire outline in one go. So in this case, I would almost pick O1 as the winner for the outline category of these 4 here. And then for beats, it gave me 8. I didn't think it was as good at the beats as other models have been. Again, 3.5 Sonnet was the winner here. Surprisingly, GPT-4o did really well with the beats as well as O1. And in case you're unfamiliar with what beats are, this is essentially just a more detailed outline of the scene. Okay, that's all it is. People get hung up on the words and the terminology used. All I'm doing is asking it to flesh out the scene with more specific details, right? So all of this I lump into this brainstorming section. It did okay, but it certainly wasn't amazing at this. Probably the best that I got out of it were these log lines, but it did have some redeeming qualities like being able to outline the entire chapter at once. So let's go to the next section, which is all about the prose. Now, in the prose section, I award points that go into this overall score based on two things. First of all, I'm giving it 3 prompts: a basic prose prompt, a complex prose prompt, and a dialogue prose prompt. Just 3 different prompts to kind of measure how it does at different types of prose. And in each of these 3, I'm asking for 500 words. And so the first thing that I rate these on is how close to 500 words did it get? Did it go over? Did it go under? How much did it go under, etc.? And in some cases, it did really well. It got 569 words out of 500 for the dialogue prose. It did 300 words, which is not too bad for the basic prose prompt. It only got 190 though for the complex prose prompt. So I imagine it's a little bit all over the place. I imagine this is a case where you might want to prompt things a couple of times until you get the results that you want. However, there is one other thing that I score these results on, and that is how many words out of the words that it gave me are actually usable. And to do this, I go through, and I'll actually show you here. Here's the basic prompt. I will go and highlight in green the words that I think are usable, and then I will count those up and put it here. And then to add these to the overall score here, I take a percentage. And the higher the percentage of overall words, meaning, for instance, this one, it only gave me 190 words, but 161 of these I thought were usable. If we actually go and look at this one in the document, you can see most of this prompt that it gave me is highlighted in green. So even though it gave me fewer words, I was using this complex prose prompt that used Novel Crafter in part of the prompting process to give me these words. And part of that prompt includes things like a sample chapter of my own work to see how well it mimics my words as compares to the basic prose prompt, which does not do that. And as you can see, so much of this was actually, I consider to be usable prose, right? At least compared to other models, because I see with this whole qualitative process, I'm seeing multiple versions of this scene being written over and over and over again. And eventually you get to a point where you're just like, anything that's kind of new and interesting is good. And it's very clear when an AI is kind of falling back on old generic patterns, because I get the same sort of results all the time. And with DeepSeek, I was getting very interesting prose that I thought was much better than this sort of droning generic prose that I often get out of AI. And you can see some of that here, like his canteen hung empty, pack gutted days ago when the expedition's mules had panicked and bolted into the fissures. I hadn't mentioned anything about mules in this particular prompt, so it invented this itself, and I thought it worked, and so I was able to highlight that. If we continue to look at it, figures lurched across the broken terrain 200 yards behind. Spindly, gray-limbed, their movements all wrong, knees snapped sideways as they scrambled over boulders, sunken eye sockets tracked him even as their jaws unhinged, sniffing. 2 dozen, maybe 30, close enough for the city scouts to spot. This was all very good, and it was going in logical directions that were slightly different than anything I've seen with the other models. This may be the fact that it was trained in a Chinese country. They probably do things quite a bit differently than the systems and everything that we have here in the States. So I imagine that the output's going to be slightly different. And I thought the quality of the work was actually quite good, especially on this Novel Crafter prose prompt, as you can see here. If you look at the basic prose prompt, which is the same scene, but with fewer instructions, there's still a lot of green highlighted here, but not quite as much. And then in the dialogue prose prompt, also kind of the same thing, still a lot of green, but not as much as there was with the Novel Crafter prompt. So what this tells me is that adding things like a sample chapter of your own work and other prompting instructions to give more information about the characters and the setting and all of that, the more you can add in to that prompt, and using a tool like Novel Crafter to facilitate that, the better your output's going to be, at least with DeepSeek. Some don't respond to those things as well, and that's one of the reasons why I put that prompt in there, to see how well does it respond to a more complicated prompt as opposed to a simple prompt on the same scene. So that was interesting. I thought this dialogue prompt was okay. Certainly not groundbreaking, but okay. And the nice thing about the dialogue prose prompt is that it did give me more words. I got 569 words, 300 of which were usable. So that's actually pretty decent. You'll notice a lot of these, like GPT-4o actually gave me over 600 words. O1 gave me 500 words exactly. 3.5 Sonnet only gave me 368 words, but none of them had as many words that were usable as DeepSeek did, although I think in terms of overall percentage, 3.5 Sonnet might have won here. But overall, great performance there. Now for the editing Prose prompt. This is one prompt where I give it a scene that was written by, I think it was Claude 2. The scene isn't very good, and I want to see, can it take AI writing that is not great, kind of overly generic, needs a lot of work, and expand on it. And unfortunately, I didn't get great results. Only 117 words were, I believe, useful, which is not much more than the original 101 that the original scene had that I thought were usable. However, the original scene was 349 words, and DeepSeek wrote it to be 548 words. And what this tells me, and from having read through the whole thing, it rewrote the entire thing pretty significantly. The entire thing is rewritten. And even though I don't think as much of it was that good, what this does tell me is that it is capable of doing significant revisions. So I think that with the right prompting, and again, this is one of those things, this was a simple prompt where I just said, rewrite this to be stronger writing, right? That's pretty much all that the prompt said. Rewrite this scene to be stronger in its writing. It didn't do a great job, but perhaps if we prompt engineered it a little bit more, you could get more out of it. This is a reasoning engine like O1. We know that O1 is decent for editing when you prompt it correctly. So potentially with a little bit of work, we can get it prompting well. That was my overall assessment of the editing Prose prompt. And then we have what I'm just calling like the marketing prompts here. We have ad headlines that I ask it to do. I asked it to write a email newsletter, and I asked it to write an SEO article all in one go. And with the SEO article, I'm not trying to assess its writing quality as much as I am trying to look at, can it write an article all in one go? Does it follow the instructions, the outline, and everything that I give it in the article? And does it look like a decent article that I could publish? And the answer to that one is somewhat. It gave me an article that was really more of a more fleshed out outline, and it was only 1,000 words when I asked for 4,000. If you look at O1 by contrast, it gave me 5,700 words when I asked for 400. So it actually went far above and beyond. And I was actually surprised that I was able to get 5,700 words out of a single prompt in O1. So was it usable in one prompt? I say somewhat, because it wasn't necessarily bad, but it just was not fleshed out nearly enough as it needed to be. Now for the ad headline prompt and the email newsletter prompt, this is where it really failed. And this is the real reason why this overall score is so low, is because it fell flat on its face when it came to marketing prompts. So of the ad headlines that it gave me, I asked for 20. Only one I thought was any good. In the email newsletter prompt, I asked for an email newsletter announcing a new book that I'm writing. Essentially, like what I write as a book announcement to my email list. And then I count up the number of usable words like I do with the others. And this one, the number of usable words was 13. It was absolutely garbage what it gave me. And what this led me to believe is, like, even though DeepSeek actually seems to be pretty good at writing prose, like the numbers here were pretty good and the prose that it gave me was pretty usable, for some reason its grasp on marketing, copy, and anything like that sort of content creation, it is absolutely dreadful at doing it. And I tried several times to get good results and they were never really good. And so basically I would say don't use this model for marketing. It's not really what it's good at. However, there is one biggest caveat to all of this, and that is the price. So if we look at these others and the price that they have, the cheapest one here is GPT-4o, which is $2.50 for 1,000,000 tokens of input and $10 for 1,000,000 tokens of output, meaning, so 1,000,000 tokens is roughly 750 words, or 750,000 words, pardon me. So that's the cheapest one we have out of these heavy hitters. And O1, which is the model that is comparable to DeepSeek R1, is $15 for 1,000,000 tokens of input and $60 for 1,000,000 tokens of output, making it one of the more expensive, beefier models out there. DeepSeek, on the other hand, is 55 cents per 1,000,000 tokens of input and $2.19 for 1,000,000 tokens of output. That is significantly cheaper given the quality and the performance that I've seen coming out of it. Now, it's not perfect, okay? It is definitely not a perfect model. I would say it is close to on par with these best of the best models that I'm comparing it to in this video, but not perfect by any means. However, given the fact that it can do what most of them can do almost as well for a significant fraction of the cost, that to me is good enough evidence to say, okay, this is going to be my new default model. And I'm only going to deviate from this model when I need something that's higher in quality. So for instance, if I'm brainstorming, like if I'm in Novel Crafter, for example, I like to have my entire codex with everything that I've ever put into my world building present and available for the AI to look at. If I'm using DeepSeek, I can do that and brainstorm with all of that input for a fraction of the cost. And as I've already mentioned, the Prose is decent here for DeepSeek. It's not amazing. Like, it's not going to change the game in any way. And I can get very similar results out of Claude 3.5 Sonnet. However, it's not bad. And the fact that it's not bad and it's so much cheaper is a big deal for me. I should also mention that I tested some not safe for work prompts on this thing, and it does appear to have some restrictions. However, with just a little bit of jailbreaking and, trying to make sure it has context and make sure like, oh, these are consenting adults and all of that, it was able to give me some steamier, spicy scenes. It also doesn't seem to have a problem with violence. I wasn't able to get it to really gawk at the violence in some of those prompts. And I imagine if you were running this locally on your own computer, you might not even have those restrictions. So that's something to keep in mind. It does do a little bit more in terms of violence and steamy scenes and stuff like that. So overall, my recommendation for DeepSeek is, yes, it is a good model. It is definitely on par, maybe slightly less than the best models out there, which are these others that I have been testing it against. And even though it's not significantly improved on those things in any particular way, the fact that it is as cheap as it is makes it worth using more so than these others, unless you really need those other models for something specific that you're trying to achieve. Now, another thing I want to mention, just because I know I'm going to get comments about it, is the security of this thing. A lot of people are worried because it's a Chinese company, and China's been in the news because of TikTok getting banned and all this stuff, and there are people worried about cybersecurity. If you're worried about those things, my recommendation would be to go through OpenRouter, because if you've got things set up correctly in OpenRouter, that you're using it through their API, and so therefore your prompts are not going to be used by DeepSeek in any way, shape, or form. And they're not going to have access to your data. That is, unless you specifically grant them those things. The other option that you have is if you have a computer that is beefy enough to run large language models on your own computer, download a tool like LM Studio, and then just put the open source version of DeepSeek on your computer and run it locally. You can do that without internet. So if you're worried about cybersecurity, put it onto a computer that is cut off from the internet, and you can continue to use it on that computer even with no internet. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't think that there are any major cybersecurity concerns, at least no more than you also have with Meta or OpenAI or any of these other tools that we use quite regularly, which, to be fair, is always something to be at least mildly concerned about. So those are all my thoughts about DeepSeek R1. I think it's a good tool, but made even more impressive just by the cost of using it. So go check it out, and I will see you in the next video.